I was trying to think of the theme for this talk, and so I wrote this title for the talk, and I sent it to Alice thinking, I'm going to talk about this old 80s video game where there were all sorts of obstacles, and the little man would fall into all the different obstacles, and it was super hard, and you never really knew how to get through it. And that'll be this metaphor for trying to move science to the public. And then when I went back to get screenshots from the video game, there's actually no quicksand in the video game. So my memory as a 5-year-old of playing this Atari game in my grandmother's basement was obviously somewhat incomplete. So there's no quicksand, but there's every other kind of pitfall you can imagine that would be in a little digital jungle. So Atari Man has received this PDF, courtesy of me, and I'm going to talk about how you move science to society in all the surprise ways that it gets thwarted in the process. All right, so Pitfall was this amazing 80s video game with this amazing controller. There's just like forward and back and one jump button, and it was super, super hard because whenever you hit the button, it took about half a second before the man would jump. But I want you guys to feel how horrifying it really was to play it, how much, how nervous I was playing it. So Tom is going to demonstrate what this was really like in the 80s, playing this super sweet game.
This is good.
You guys are getting design ideas right now, I know it. You can tell.
Oh, next.
Crocodiles.
Wow. Scales. Dangerous. Yeah.
Ooh.
Now that's going to be the funniest thing, the most exciting thing of the day. There's no way I can top that. It's also kind of a really beautiful example of how far we've come in computer science in 20, 30 years. So, who is this girl and why is she talking about 80s video games? Well, I live here on the island of Curacao, and I study coral reefs at this research station here in Carmabi, which is one of the oldest research stations in the Caribbean and is starting to become a center of some of the most prominent new research on coral reefs. My specific study system is corals, how they reproduce, and how their babies manage to survive the ocean, find a place to live, and deal with everything that humans throw at them. So the reason I got interested in science communication and science publishing in the world of digital science was because of the ocean, the pitfall of the ocean itself. If you were to go fishing in Key Largo in 2007 on the Greyhound charter boat, this is what you would catch in a day. Not bad. A small shark, which is a little bit sad, but a bunch of fish. However, if you went fishing with this exact same tour operator in 1958, this is what you would catch in a day of fishing.
Humans.
and fashionable swimwear. So that's what we did to the ocean. And it's hard for science to ever convey that, but these two photos can tell you so easily what we did to the ocean. There used to be a lot of humans swimming around, and now there aren't as many. The Caribbean version of that, the coral reef version of that, is that we do still have some coral reefs that look like this, but there are many places in the Caribbean that look a lot more like that. This was a coral reef once upon a time. So that story of the collapse of the world's oceans was told in this paper in 2001 by a professor of mine in grad school. And the story is that that's not even how bad it gets, because humans have been plundering the ocean since before Columbus, eating the sharks and the whales and the monk seals. And when we got to the big fish, that was already halfway to nothing. So this paper in Science created enough of a splash that they not only managed to get 1 day of press attention. No, the professor who wrote this said, no, we got 3 days of press attention. So there's 1 day of press, and then day 3 of press, And when I find this out, I'm thinking, okay, right, but what about day 4? You've just told this story about 500 years of biology that took you, it was a paper that took 5 years to produce, and we paid attention to it in the news for 3 days. And now on day 4, we've got this, and still this. So in marine conservation, we can never make enough noise in the public eye through the media to scale with how bad things are. If it takes you 3 days to do a paper and you get to talk about it in public for 1 day, we're never going to make enough noise to change things, to make enough of a scene, to make enough of a racket. So I spent a lot of time just mad about this and frustrated and wondering how I would ever contribute to conservation with my research until I realized kind of how to talk about this in a way that makes sense to me. So my diagnosis of the problem here is that we treat science like the news. It's disguised as the news, but it's not. And by treating it like the news, we're doing ourselves a huge disservice. So here's one of the 4 pitfalls I'm going to be talking about today, which is science news. And little man with his PDF is potentially not going to make it to that next crocodile, the next digital crocodile. This is a slide I've been using a long time, but now I get to add this sweet Atari system to it. Think about characteristics of the news versus everything else about products, about durable goods. The news happens. It happens fast. It's refreshed fast. It's fact-checked fast. You can make more news every day, so old news doesn't have a lot of value. And if you want to go find quality news, you look at the name of the publisher, but then you look at today's news. You sort it by author and date and place of publication. But think about everything else that we buy and consume. Products, software, pharmaceuticals, Ataris, whatever. Those don't just come into the world on their own. You have to go make one deliberately and to serve a purpose. And they're not things you can usually refresh or renew every day. Quality control takes time and product development takes time. So versions come out with spaces in between. But that's okay because when something works well, we keep using it and we keep using it. So when we go buy a product, we don't look for the one that was necessarily the newest. We look for the one that's the most functional and that works the best, is the most reliable. So if you think about these 2 categories and where scientific information, where PDFs fit, they look just like the news, but they're not. They have all the characteristics of being a durable good, but we treat them like they're news. We search for what we organize and communicate it as if it's news that refreshes itself every day. I wrote about this in Wired UK 2 months ago. And as a sign that I think this is a message that's worth repeating, somebody took a screenshot of the article and underlined my quote, "Across the landscape, we obsessively substitute the new for the important." The reason it's particularly interesting that this was tweeted is that Evan Williams is a co-founder of Twitter. Mm-hmm. And he saw that and thought, that's a good point. So the person who co-founded Twitter thinks that we are all too obsessed with the new and not enough interested in the important, then we're on to something here. And in fact, he is also one of the co-founders of Medium. So he's trying to get away from the obsession with new and the obsession with clickbait and start talking about the quality and the value of content more. So it's really bad news. If we're using the news to communicate science to the public, if that's our way that we get information out to the world, we're doing ourselves a disservice and a danger. We're only letting scientists and the media talk about a new piece of research information the day it was published, and that lets everyone else take command of the message for the other 364 days of the year. That it's not just your casual skeptic, your armchair skeptic. There are consulting firms paid to create doubt around reliable science only to prevent acting upon the science. So Merchants of Doubt is a book written by a professor of mine from Scripps and now being turned into a movie that just came out here and is coming out soon in the US. It basically talks about how the consultants and the scientists who were hired to deny the link between smoking and lung cancer are now some of the same people and some of the same firms that are involved in denying the science behind fossil fuels and climate change. So it's starting to get grave and depressing, because it's not just that we want everyone to access PDFs because we think they have the right. It's that if we're talking about science using mostly the press for one day at a time, and paid consultants get the other days of the year to then deny the scientific consensus, we're not helping society, we're harming each other. It's to the point where, you know, we've got people denying the effectiveness of vaccines. People's lives are now on the line. I'm clicking this twice every time I click it. Now, this isn't really anyone's fault, because we're all professionally obligated to be obsessed with the new, to focus on the new. Scientists are always on to the next project. There's no press tour or book tour for a scientific article. You know, PR offices are, of course, looking for what's new. Journals are looking for their new content, and so on and so on. We're obsessed with what's new to the point of absurdity in some cases. This report about the Caribbean's coral reefs is a summary of 42 years of data, basically every reliable scientific time series we have on Caribbean reefs. And it took the authors 3 years, I think, to put it all together. They issued it with the International Union for the Conservation of Nature. And then a large newspaper said, hey, we want you to write an op-ed about this. And a few weeks later, they said, well, here's our op-ed. And they said, oh, sorry, too late. This is already old. So it took 42 years to happen. It took 3 years to write. And a few weeks later, it was old news. No longer worthy of a spot on the op-ed page. An op-ed did end up being published eventually in the New York Times, but it wasn't easy to fight its way in. So this is a message I want the media and science journalists to think about and internalize more. Science news shouldn't be something that ages. We shouldn't have a taboo about publishing or talking about science that was published last week. That's just absurd. An equivalent to that is how finally science journalism has stopped giving equal weight to both sides of a controversy when in fact there is no controversy. So in the case of climate change, now say the National Public Radio in the US isn't giving equal weight to the science deniers and the scientists. They're saying there is a scientific consensus and that's what we're reporting. It goes against the journalistic tradition of equal weight to two sides of an argument, but that's not how science works. If you have a massive consensus around a fact, then that is our best version of the truth, and that's what should be getting the attention. In a similar way, to only let science be important one day of the year is silly, and we need to get over that. Something strange, I think, is happening right now, which is that you would think Twitter would be the most spastic and short attention spans when it comes to dealing with what's new, things that are breaking that day. But Twitter is actually becoming a useful aggregator of relative importance, particularly with the whole "in case you missed it" phenomenon. I've been in weeks where I read Twitter a lot. I noticed that a lot of media outlets post the same things over and over and over. You guys have probably noticed that occasionally. So while they're not able to repost it on their main webpage, the New York Times can't say, hey, look, this is still important the day after the scientists published it. On Twitter, they're saying, hey, remember this? This is still important. Hey, this is still important. This is still important. So somehow we've reached sort of like a speed limit in Twitter where nobody can publish stuff that fast to come up with a new tweet every 5 seconds, but that has created the space for people to start floating things back up to the surface when they think they're particularly important. Very fascinating that the citizens and the press agents and Twitter is becoming a better sort of, what would you say, kind of filter of importance than the front page of the newspaper.